Thank you, everybody, for joining this meeting of the Expert Advisory Committee. As I've shared with other people, this is one of the few times in my life I get to be called an expert, and I really enjoy that. That's just so great, particularly with my son. It's just really nice to be able to say, you see, I am an expert. Doesn't do me much good, but hey, we try. Just procedurally, if folks could be on mute when they are not speaking, that will help everybody in terms of diminishing the feedback. So appreciate that. I want to give a very brief overview of the agenda, as well as do our normal roll call. So why don't we start with the roll call of the EAC members, and we'll just do this in alphabetical order. I believe that Christy is not available to join us today, so I can start us off with a Christy Brigham not present. Carrie?
Mark Schwartz has said he thinks he's in the waiting room right now.
Okay.
Who can I direct him to Kim Arbuckle?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So Christy Brigham is not present. John Calloway. Not present. Chelsea, I see you there.
Present.
Nathaniel.
Hi, yep, present.
Matt.
Present. Nice to see everybody.
And you. William, has he joined? He may join us later because he did respond positively, but he's not present. Lara.
Present.
Connor. Not present. Debbie.
I'm here.
Mark. I can see you. I think we can take that as a present, even though he's on mute.
Yes, here, sorry.
Great, thank you. Carrie.
I'm here.
Melissa. If we do not have Melissa or John, we'll deal that separately as we get to the quick overview on the report, because those are the two leads on the blue carbon. And Marion.
Yes, present.
Great. All right. Well, in terms of an agenda overview, today what we'd like to do is a very brief synopsis of the recommendations as they were finalized. The final report has not yet become public because ARB is working on it to put it on the website, but it has been submitted. And the recommendations per se have not changed, but they are placed into their larger report context and meaning, and we'll want to take a minute on that today. We'll have public comment during this meeting, as always, at 2:10, and then also at the end of the meeting as we're wrapping up. This is our pivot to the next portion of our work on AB 1757, and after the break, we will do a quick review of the key points of 1757 that we are addressing. One thing that I do want to call out in advance of that for everyone is that this is an excellent time for us to identify the speakers that we would like to have, the experts that we would like to have join us. So I hope that by the end of today or the end of this week, people can get in their recommendations of guest speakers that they would like to have as part of a next meeting. I can tell you for myself, I have some folks I want to recommend for that, and I hope that, I know that Carrie has already done some work on that. Welcome, Will. Thank you for joining us. So that is something that we'll touch on later, but I want to make sure that everybody is aware of that so that we can get our recommendations out in a timely fashion on that. So that is the overview of today's meeting. It is short, it is remote, so we will be very businesslike with that. So unless there are any comments, why don't we move to the second item, which is a brief synopsis of the top lines of our recommendations. These were presented at our last meeting, and there was good discussion around them as well. And then final sections of the report have been prepared. But we thought that it would be a good idea to just bring those final recommendations back up into people's mind and see if there are any kind of key points there. I'd like to just kick that off with the identification that within the expert advisory committee recommendations, we clearly found that the state could achieve very significant emissions reductions through the natural and working land sector directly, just in the direct side, but also many were indirect, and we did not even account for those because we recognized that those would be accounted for in the fossil fuels sector in one way, shape, or form. So they wouldn't be credited to the natural and working land sector. But the range of benefits that we identified were in the 250 to 400 million metric tons of CO2 emissions reductions that could be achieved over the next 10 years. And that is really substantial, I think, in the larger eyes of the state in terms of the other sectors. That said, it will take investment to get there and focus to get there. But the committee's feeling was it was well worth it to do that just on the carbon benefits alone before we even begin to count the climate benefits writ large, which we had all agreed none of our recommendations would be without that integration of the broader climate adaptation and environmental justice and just transition elements. So all of our consideration, all of our sectors included that consideration. John, thank you for joining. We appreciate that, because we're going to put you on the spot in a little bit with that. And net, the investment in this sector is going to be, if not the least cost, very close to the least cost of any investment made in achieving the goals of carbon reduction and climate adaptation. So we have made what to some would be an audacious recommendation, but to others would seem like a very logical recommendation that the state increase its new investments in the natural and working land sector to at least $10 billion over the next 5 years. And that is because the return to the state and to all the citizens of the state, both human and otherwise, is so significant in this sector. So within that, we really felt that the opportunity provided us by the 1757 committee was to highlight this hitherto relatively unleveraged opportunity to address both carbon emissions reductions and climate adaptation. And as I say, with that lens of a just transition. So that is at a very high level, that is a really core takeaway of this committee's work in this first phase. And that there are opportunities in every single one of the land use and land types that we have considered. With that, I would like to just ask if each group would be willing to give a very short synopsis of the top line recommendations, because these were identified in our last meeting, but it would probably be helpful for everybody who does not eat, breathe, and sleep these things to have a brief refresher on that. So I'm going to stop there at that overview level, and perhaps I could ask, Carrie, do you feel comfortable starting off with the top line recommendations for agriculture? Just, a couple of minutes for each for that, and then we'd go to Mark, and then to Laura, and then to Marion, and John, and then Debbie and myself.
Sure, just for clarification, do you want me to just give, like, paraphrase each implementation target, or just?
If you can paraphrase the top takeaway, yes.
Okay. I may defer to Nathaniel for one of the ones that he had a larger voice in. Nathaniel, you're here, right?
I am, yeah.
Okay. And
I'm
we'll,
sorry, Carrie, can I jump in? This is Jen
Sure.
Phillips with the Resources Agency. Committee members, if you can be on camera, that would be super helpful since it's very dialogue based today. And then members of the public, we ask you keep your camera mostly off except for public comment period, just so we know who the committee members are. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jen. And then Will and Nathaniel, I'll try and keep my eyes on you so that if you want to say something, wave at me. Okay, so we are the subcommittee or the subgroup that tried to pull together a lot of input on agriculture. We first prioritized the implementation target to elevate the just transition that's needed within agriculture and other sectors. And we, some of the aspects that we prioritized were looking at barriers to farmland access and tenure, supporting access to young BIPOC, small and diversified farmers, looking at technical assistance for them. We also, some of the other things that we tried to highlight were looking at reduction in pesticide use and trying to highlight work from other countries that are taking the approach to reduce their pesticide load, and so that we can learn from other regions. We looked at the implementation target 2, which was protecting farmland and avoided conversion from agriculture. We did leave the high target of 100% of California farmland maintaining its equilibrium status, but we tried to incorporate the committee's comments on making sure that we were looking at not just conversion of natural lands, that we're looking at other sectors as well, to come into that that target, so that we weren't trying to put an undue burden on other land use types. And so we had some material in that section to elevate some of the existing programs, and then also looking at ways to contribute efforts to look at how to fund the viability and decrease risk of keeping farms intact and functional, doing some studies on that. But I'm really trying to paraphrase a lot here. Each of these is like a whole page. And then we also tried to look at how to expand farm edge diversification, and made recommendations there on how to store carbon and increase ecosystem services through that effort. And then we did adjust our target for the organic agriculture. We rephrased it to say expand opportunity for organic agriculture to 100% of farming operations and 20% of statewide farming acres by 2045. So we're in alignment with the scoping plan, but we try to expand the opportunity and access to that practice. And then finally, our last one, actually dovetails more with what we're doing in our next section, which was trying to, this is really hard to drive and talk at the same time, try to increase access to soil building practices and continue investment in integrated fertilizer irrigation and soil fertility management practices to reduce nitrous oxide emissions and build soil organic carbon. And we would like to focus on how to increase the investment to reach those targets, but we also in this section really prioritized looking at emissions reductions of nitrous oxide, and we still think that building soil organic carbon is important in agriculture, but that we prioritized in our section the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. I definitely did not stick to the 2 minutes. I'm sorry, Lori. That was really hard to kind of do that off the cuff.
Well, you're a
So-
pro. You did a great job. And yes, you were the first, so you took the brunt of it, and I appreciate that. So can we move to our next report out? And, oh, I'd gone through before. Mark, if you're willing to do that next, and then we'll go on to, just so you're teed up, Lara, and then Marion, and then Debbie, and then John, and I will go last on the cross-cutting and forests.
Sure. So I'll
Realize
go.
some people
Yeah.
may turn to others to also chime in, like Chelsea.
Sure. So I can go second. This is developed lands, and we had 4 targets. The first was to create a California urban green space strategy by 2030 with ongoing tracking toward implementation. That there are lots of strategies, so we recommend a portfolio strategy of things from green roofs to daylighting streams to urban vegetation. These can reduce urban energy use and think it has a large impact on avoided emissions, but also has co-benefits of direct effects, benefits to human health and reduced heat exposure, and huge opportunities for just transitions and serving underserved communities, as underserved communities are by and large or far away the least buffered from urban heat island effects through vegetation. And we recognize that a challenge there is that in urban environments, there's a trade-off between green space and water usage, and the state of California is simultaneously trying to reduce urban water usage. And so part of this urban green space strategy really requires thinking through that carefully and thinking about the cost and benefits of that used water in the urban environment. Target 2 is to increase carbon sequestration to the 50 million metric tons by 2050. The CARB scoping plan model suggests is possible. There are tree planting programs in place in California that are moving us toward that goal. But again, this requires, I think, some planning on behalf of the state of California, in that this target might not be as easy to achieve as suggested, again, because of programs to reduce our urban water usage and the need to water those trees that in the urban environment, but also other problems and challenges with respect to source material. That matching appropriate trees to locations is a challenge, and the availability of appropriate material seems to be limiting, as well as technical expertise in helping communities plant the right trees in the right places. But again, this is an opportunity to help redress the issues of underserved communities, in that underserved communities are the least well equipped to take advantage of tree planting programs, and that and are more exposed than other parts of the community. Target 3 was to reduce the expansion of developed lands. That all other ecosystems talk briefly, at the very least, about potential losses of carbon associated with land conversion. That land conversion is mostly to developed lands. Right now, the state of California projects that the state will increase by less than 3%, 1.1 million people by 2050. That's not very large. Everyone knows about the housing shortage in California, but smart growth models focusing on infill should be able to accommodate a lot of this growth. So again, the state needs a plan on how to reduce expansion of other of developed lands by chewing up other ecosystems to mitigate that housing shortage, given a relatively modest population growth expectation. And then the 4th target, again, returns to the CARB modeling estimations of achieving compliance to wildland-urban interface defensible space within 10 years. That CARB estimated that coming into full compliance would result in landowners reducing carbon stocks in the wildland-urban interface by 4.2 million metric tons. This seems to be a plausible and acceptable loss of carbon, and something that pays benefits back in terms of fire safety and allowing us to achieve better outcomes with respect to forest carbon. And so those are the targets that we identified, and that's probably sufficient for my summary. Lori, is that okay?
That was excellent, concise.
Thank
And I believe we identified, Lara, that you were next.
Sure. So I'm reporting out on shrublands. So shrublands were included in the scoping plan target to treat, 2 to 2.5 million acres of forest shrublands and grasslands per year. But many of the treatment types, that would target forests are really not appropriate in shrublands. And so we focused on actions that can and should be taken in shrublands without having any sort of specific quantitative targets in our section, in part because the modeling and data availability for shrubland ecosystems is much more limited than it is for some other systems. And so our targets are really also specifically focused on chaparral and coastal sage scrub communities where there is the most data. And so our first target is really focused on addressing fire threats to shrubland ecosystems because in many parts, for example, the chaparral distribution in Southern California, the fire return interval is too short, or the fire frequency is too high. And so there's the potential to expand biomass in vegetation and soils in these systems by reducing ignition. And so our first target is really focused on preventing fire ignitions, expanding programs that prevent fire ignitions, prioritizing the largest source of ignitions, and then also focused on protecting adjacent human communities. And so this is really around more of the home hardening and community scale protection in communities that are kind of interwoven with these habitats. And then the second target for these systems is pursuing conservation and restoration consistent with the 30 by 30 objectives in the state. And we expanded this to include each sort of shrubland ecosystem type across the state. There is probably not similar amounts of data on how best to do and prioritize shrubland habitats. And so the recommendation is to do this, in a way that's collaborative with scientists who have expertise in these areas. Restoration in some of these shrubland habitats is not a kind of a slam dunk. And so there's also where restoration can be pursued. That is one pathway, but conservation and prevention of ignitions are sort of two primary high level recommendations. And that's it. We just had two.
Kept it focused and to the point and the most meaningful one. So I'm sure this is deeply appreciated by the state as well. Clarity. Marian.
Hi, yeah, thanks. So I'm presenting on behalf of the Deserts Subcommittee, and our recommendations, I guess a through thread on all of them is the avoidance of disturbance, especially, in desert habitats that are very sensitive, and small disturbances can have meaningful impacts over long time scales. So that's kind of a theme. We had 4 recommendations. One is for no further land conversion other than the estimated approximate 2,600 acres per year associated with city-related growth and within perimeters of existing municipal jurisdictions, again, with a focus on the infill, like Mark was also mentioning as well. Second, for any land conversion occurring outside of this estimated city growth, that is not recommended. And if land conversion is necessary, then appropriate mitigations for carbon sequestration shall be prioritized. And in addition to prioritization for, water, biodiversity, habitat conservation, appropriate to the timescales for desert ecosystems. The third is accelerating the 2022 scoping plan conservation recommendation of 15,000 acres per year to a minimum of 15,000 acres per year plus a maximum feasible amount beyond that. And then our fourth recommendation focuses on restoration activities, which should be focused on invasive species removal, tamarisk and other species, especially those that have an impact on water-related resources in the areas, and restoration of riparian zones as well, in order to prioritize the short and long-term carbon stocks and the co-benefits for water, again, water conservation, biodiversity enhancement, and ecosystem health. And this is also in the cross-cutting initiatives that we'll hear from later as well. For pathways to achieve these things, I think the one thing I really want to highlight is the engagement with key stakeholders is of critical importance. There is a great amount of activity in the desert areas of California. Residents, agriculture, tourism, all the great things that California supports. And there's communities there, including at least a dozen different tribal groups as well that all have very important voices in all of this. So we want to emphasize that aspect. Investment into ongoing state desert and riparian conservation programs are also another good way to implement this. I think it was in 2019 was when the Desert Habitat Conservation Program was established by the state. So that program's kind of just getting itself up and off the ground, but that's a good mechanism for the implementation of some of these. So I'll stop there and thank you.
Thanks. And I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but we aren't trying to go into the implementation pathways today because we won't be able to get through this if we do. Those
Okay.
will be in that. I believe that we asked you, John, to go next, and then Debbie.
Yes. Okay, so for wetland issues, our first target or our first recommendation was around expanding the existing acreage targets for delta wetlands and then also incorporating saline or coastal wetlands into those targets. So for the delta, we recommended growing from the existing 60,000 acre target to 82,500 acres total overall, 32,500 of that being tidal wetland restoration. That's consistent with the recommendations for tidal wetland restoration in the Delta from the Delta plan. And then 50,000 acres of managed wetlands and rice cultivation in the Delta. And then the other acreage targets were for coastal wetlands or saline systems. And those are the immediate opportunity, both because of existing data and also because they don't emit or they emit very little methane or hardly any methane at all. So we had proposed a target of 20,000 acres of tidal wetland restoration in San Francisco Bay, where there is the most data available. And then the later targets were really to improve information around other coastal wetlands so that we can set targets for those areas in the next round, in the next 5 years. And then also beyond tidal wetlands, a restoration target of 300 acres of eelgrass in San Francisco Bay by 2030, and growing that substantially as more information and resources are available for that to 3,000 acres by 2038. And then the second target was really more around prioritizing conservation and restoration that will lead to long-term benefits and maximize carbon sequestration. So conservation of the least disturbed wetlands is a high priority. And then using restoration approaches that allow for long-term resilience of coastal wetlands and that incorporate sea level rise or other climate change impacts, so that the wetlands will be resilient. And then the last target was really around filling data gaps, and our overarching issue there was to provide to do detailed statewide mapping of wetlands and coastal seaweed habitats at least once every 5 years, with an initial survey completed by 2030. And then a range of other data gaps highlighted across each of the different systems to improve other understanding and especially modeling of those systems, with a focus on the coastal ecosystems, and then also incorporating mountain meadows as another high priority area where there are lots of opportunities, but also significant data gaps, both in terms of mapping and in terms of spatial variation in terms of potential carbon benefits.
Thank you. Debbie, and calling on Chelsea if Debbie wishes.
Sure. So it sounds like we're really just focusing on the primary targets themselves. So I'm just gonna, we have 2 targets and I'll just go through them very quickly. So I'm here representing the grasslands group. So our first target is to reduce the annual conversion rate of grasslands by 75%. And the second target is to invest at least $50 million annually to support implementation of practices that help promote soil health principles and protect and rebuild carbon on grasslands. So those are our 2 targets, and I can go into more detail if you want.
That is admirably succinct. And Chelsea did a really terrific job at our last meeting, walking everybody through some of the implementation there. But I think the clarity of that is something that is very compelling. So I appreciate that. Chelsea, is there anything you want to add, or given that succinctness?
I don't think so. Yeah, if that works for right now, that's great. Thanks, Debbie.
Well, I will close with forests and then the cross-cutting. And I think probably everybody in the meeting has heard some of these cross-cutting themes. But on forests, we had 4 items, forests being the most expandable as well as the largest current biological sink in the state. And the first was to target those forests that have the most capacity to increase sequestration in the shortest period of time. And those are on the private working forest side, and targeting to increase carbon sequestration by at least 150 to 250 million metric tons in the next 10 years. And that is dependent upon conserving 1 to 3 million acres of forest with working forest conservation easements that keeps these lands in production, but enhances their resilience and their net carbon storage. In riparian forests, where we have lost such a great extent of those riparian forests, it is accelerating the current state target of conservation and restoration to 2,000 acres a year. In oak woodland forest, this is really to prioritize and protect existing oak forests and to restore oak woodland habitat back to more natural conditions where feasible. And so we really focused in on conservation and restoration of the mixed Oregon white oak and black oak types, blue oak and blue oak pine habitats, and re-oaking in the Los Angeles, San Diego, and Riverside, Orange County area. In the fire resilience and forest restoration, we paired these because fire is a key part of our natural systems here in California. And it was flagged by Lara in discussing the shrublands type. In the scoping plan, the there was a large category for accelerating fire to 2.5 million acres, but we want to exclude that from our coastal chaparral types and really focus that in the mixed conifer and appropriate oak woodland habitats. And to focus in on fuels management and prescribed fire with the goal of shifting fire occurrence in the state by 2034 to being 75% low to moderate net beneficial fire. So the other piece to that is that we recommended developing a template approach that the state should lead for smaller landowners in the 500 acre and less category to really facilitate their engagement in restoration and fuels management and the ability to get good fire back on the landscape. So that was a really critical piece of that. On the cross-cutting recommendations, which we had flagged before, we had broken these into two areas, what we're calling the social and cultural approaches to this work, and then the desired ecosystem function outcomes and carbon outcomes of the work. And as has been flagged by a number of people, the question of equity and utilizing the just transitions approach as defined by the ILO is critical. Enhancing tribal engagement is a key piece for us. We flagged the fact that there's a real need for workforce development here. That there's actually, this is a very important source of long-term employment in natural and working lands, but that we have a thin pipeline of people and supplies coming into this area. So it's an area that has both impact on the ground for the state, but significant impact for people's involvement in natural and working lands and in employment, and particularly in rural areas where that kind of investment circulates more than it does tend to do in urban areas. So it has a real impact in frontline communities. That pipeline question was referred to in a couple of cases with Mark and in restoration area as well, and that is plant material development. So seed sources and plant material for restoration, whether it is in the rural and context or the urban one. And then technical assistance and the need for increased investment there on the state's part to help communities in climate smart resource management. And very importantly, as flagged by Carrie early on, the question of enhanced community engagement. And that's something that Matt Holmes also has consistently raised in our conversations, and we wanted to highlight that. In terms of the ecosystem function and the kind of carbon outcomes, what you heard over and over again was the need to dramatically scale up conservation of these natural and working land types, really dramatically scale that up. Secondly, we all recognize the need that if we're going to be involved in restoration, we want to conserve and ensure the value of that restoration for the long term. So that is the integration of short-term restoration actions around carbon outcomes with long-term implementation. Restoration of natural systems function with climate resilient native species came across in every area, and that support for natural systems management. In other words, while we're managing for certain kinds of commodities, we also need to change that management so that it is more effective in supporting the underlying natural systems function so that we have a more durable set of carbon and climate outcomes. Reductions in ground and system disturbance, particularly soils, came across everything except in the urban arena, that the idea of reducing disturbance to maintain carbon in the soil, to maintain the communities in the soil that support plant communities, really key. And in several areas, this issue of conservation of buffer zones, transitional zones, as we see climate change shifting where habitats are, whether it's from sea level rise or whether there are natural shifts, such as in the chaparral and grassland communities under fire, that we want to, under a fire regime, we want to be able to have the ability for systems to shift with climate change, and that means both restoration and conservation of buffer zones. And that feeds into the theme that we're talking about conservation for systems, not just for very special places. And that we're really emphasizing the conservation of working lands. And the old joke is that all lands work, only some people get paid for that work, but we want to invest in that work overall. So that is a quick synopsis of each of the areas. And we are in time at this point for a brief committee discussion and opening for public comment. And we'll still be on our timeline. So are there any thoughts or feedback from committee members before we turn to the public? Anything from Jen or Adam before we go to the public? Matt.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly thank everybody for seeing the people in these analyses, and that, you know, appreciating the contributions of human brains, whether they're helping or being destructive, and you know, trying to get people involved. So the community engagement, community design, and community leadership, and the just transition literacy. I'm very proud of this committee. I was happy to see those recommendations come out. I really like that $10 billion too, Mark.
Well, from our mouths to the governor's ear, that's what we'd like to see. Adam or Jen, any thoughts there before we go to the public?
Yeah, just real quick, just kind of echoing what Matt said. I just wanted to thank you all for putting in so much work. A lot of extra time went into this. So yeah, thanks for doing all that and producing such a great document. So we are pouring over it. So yeah, thank you.
Nothing further from me. This is Jen Phillips, but I do know we have a couple other state people, maybe Virginia or Matt Botail. If you have anything to share, please do too.
Virginia, you are muted.
Okay, how about now?
Excellent.
Okay, cool. I also wanted to say thank you. I really appreciate all the time and thought you've put into this. Jen, just to clarify, is this a good time for clarifying questions, or is that later in the agenda?
Yeah, this is a good time, Virginia.
Okay, I do have a couple. So on the target of 381,000 acres of farm edges, I wanted to see how you all came to that number. I'm assuming that means linear acres, but I just wanted to clarify. And then when you suggest eventually reaching 100% of farm edges, does that mean still like edges of farms and not parcels, or does that, what I'm concerned about is places for tractors to do their turnarounds. So I'm hoping for clarity on that. And then on the organic target, I am wondering what the committee means when you say opportunity for 100% of operations to transition to organic agriculture, because one could say they have that opportunity now. So I wonder what you mean there. And that's it. Thank you.
Carrie or Nathaniel, would either of you take those questions?
Nathaniel, can you take that last one?
Yep. You want me to do that first, Carrie?
Yes, please.
Sure. That was ambiguous, and oh, I apologize for our ambiguity in that regard. Probably we should have specified that the state review the actual pragmatic opportunity. In the implementation targets underneath that, we spelled out how we thought that 100% could be achieved. In other words, we're working under the assumption that even though we all assume to live in a just society, that the pragmatics of that is less than 100% achievable or 100% access. I would definitely, and I don't want to speak for Carrie and Will, but I would appreciate any feedback on how that could be clarified or spelled out in better detail.
I think also what I remember, Nathaniel, you commenting on, because we were trying to take in the input from the public session, because originally it said 70% of farms, I believe, because there was a discussion about making sure that there was an inclusion of all size farms. It's not just like having a program that focused on acres, that there would be an effort to include all the full spectrum of growers in California. So I think that we changed it to that also just because of what Nathaniel said. We were like, how do we try to include that idea in a target in a quantitative way? But it seems like it's probably more qualitative as to what we were trying to say. Am I putting words in your mouth, Nathaniel?
No, you're not. I think that, yeah, we did change some of the verbiage there around the opportunity component. And I think that we were relying on our implementation pathways to, I guess, kind of give some context to that.
Yeah. And Virginia, I would just flag that there's really significant discussion in some of the pathways, as well as the introduction, that also gives a context to that. Is there anything, Will, you would want to add?
No, I just want to confirm that the reason we went to 100% is to ensure that small farm holders or owners could be part of the game, could participate in the expansion of organic management. And
then who will take the fringe calculation? I love that idea of a calculation on the fringe. But who would be the lead person to answer that? Carrie?
I will try to answer that, and it would probably also be good, Virginia, to speak in more detail about it. But I think the farm edges, the concept wasn't to make it so that tractors can't turn around, but that there are available resources for those who want to do the farm edge restoration that's appropriate to the region. And I need to look at the definitions for that. I don't think it was including the like looking at gullies and other things along the farm, like along roads. I think it was just inclusive of farm edges. So it's not my best answer, but that's what I can do right now. And maybe since we're in dialogue with you as well, is that it would be as we talk about the way that we want to go forward as a group, maybe we can have a discussion at the end about how to work better with the agencies or with our respective colleagues on both sides. I'm hoping that we can have more contact to make sure that what we're doing is we're supposed to be the expert advisory committee, but we don't really operate in a vacuum. And I just want to make sure that there's a good partnership going forward in this really technical effort that's coming up. So anyway, that's might be a little bit outside of what we're supposed to be talking about at this moment, but
let's come back to that later in the meeting.
Okay.
Matt, do you have any thoughts you want to offer since we get to see you here?
Anybody? Just, I guess, a question. So, Lily, at the beginning, you had mentioned some of the CO2 carbon benefits of the strategy, I think 250 to 400 million metric tons or something to that effect. And I wanted to understand a little bit more. So how did you all arrive at that number? Was it taking values from literature, and does it include kind of net emissions plus emission removals and emission reductions? Like, help me understand a little bit more how you all got to that figure.
Sure. And you can see that it is a range because there are a series of decisions that go into where in that range the outcome would fall. And so I know on the forest side, we took our citations, and there's a fairly significant bibliography there if you have a chance to look at that. But we utilize the existing literature on the extension of the average age of forests, because older forests store more carbon. And we use that as the basis for extending out the ages of those forest types and calculated what that would be at 10 years, recognizing that you could either then maintain it at that level or you could take it farther. And we use some base calculations within that could be varied in terms of how much you wanted to extend those average ages across natural forest management forests. So not just looking at plantation management, but an average age on that basis. And then we also looked at avoided, and this was also, I'll let others speak for their areas, but then estimations around initiating restoration in oak woodland and riparian areas, also from the literature, and you can see a number of citations there. In the urban area, Mark looked at that and identified where, well, Mark and those of us on the subcommittee looked at where there were opportunities to increase from what had been recommended by the ARB. In the grasslands, they did not have an opportunity to look at citations around what changes grasslands could yield in terms of that, but I know there are. I know you did not include an actual number, Chelsea, in there, or in the Chelsea and Debbie, in terms of total carbon stocks, but we recognize that there is a range of that as well. We did not include any direct numbers around wetlands because that is so dependent upon the restoration of how many acres, and that in turn was dependent upon having better literature from the state about how many acres there are that can be restored within that. And then, of course, there are avoided fire emissions. We really actually only looked at changes in reducing the total salvage amount in terms of leaving carbon on the landscape, but recognizing that is not as precise a number as yet. And we're recommending to the state that the state actually invest in looking at that salvage question and the comparator of how much is lost in terms of carbon and the disturbance through salvage, as opposed to leaving material on the ground. And I want to, Chelsea, do you want to add anything on the grassland side? The net answer is yes, we use the literature.
Yes. Hey, sorry, my child is home sick, sitting right across from me. Yeah, we didn't look at the carbon effects because we honestly, like, I was under the impression that that wasn't like a central piece of this. It's like, what can we get done on the ground and that we think would meet or exceed this -4% carbon stock change. So we didn't even go to the literature. I mean, I could do that. But we didn't, because I didn't think that was within the scope of what we were tasked with.
And Matt, you're fully aware that this committee was not given resources, or did it have the ability to do precise modeling? So that's why there is a significant range there.
So that's helpful. And I'm just trying to kind of wrap my head around the numbers and where they came from. And timeline wise, is it kind of, Lori, you're thinking over the next 10 years, like that's generally the time frame you were thinking about those carbon benefits that would occur from the actions that you recommended, or is it just kind of varying timeframes just based on the landscape and the action?
No, this was everybody looked at this in terms of what could we accomplish in 5 to 10 years, and so this is within that 10-year time frame.
Okay, great. And I, take the opportunity to just echo what all of my predecessors said, and thank you all for your work on this. This is the type of kind of assignment that is a passion project where you're not really compensated for it. You're just thrown into it and asked to do a bunch of work, and we really appreciate it. So thank you for that.
Well, why don't we go to public comment, Jen, if we may, for if we have any. I can't see how many might be, how many questions there might be. Jen, would you be to moderate that?
This is Virginia. Jen had to step out for a quick call, so I'm going to see if I'm able to.
Because I can't see who it is, so thank you.
Okay, so I see that we have Joan Taylor as the first person with their hand up, followed by Moises Cisneros. Joan, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. Joan Taylor here. Nevada Desert Committee. And first of all, I want to appreciation to the panel. Tremendous work with regard to the desert, particularly that really seems to grasp the how different the desert is in terms of its carbon sequestration, both in time and duration and so forth. However, the team that's working on this for the Inland Desert Working Group, we did write and ask for some minor modifications of the recommended measures, restoring or mitigating for lost carbon sequestration in the desert. The issue is that it takes, slow process, sequestered vast amounts of carbon and has a very slow turnover. So the net ecosystem exchange is comparable to subtropical forests. And once disturbed, the deserts, this carbon sequestration is not going to be restored on a human time scale, much less window you're looking at. Those, we'd ask that you look at the question of restoration and mitigation specifically for carbon sequestration, because our information indicates it's not possible in our time scale. And then the only other thing is with regard to working with partners, and maybe this will be addressed when you get into implementation, but the energy partners would be very important, the state agencies to work with, because next to ag, probably, large-scale solar is the greatest threat to undisturbed desert lands, both federal and private, and state agencies do have control over where transmission goes. Therefore, there is some control over what federal lands get disturbed. Anyway, that's all I had, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Joan. Next up is Moises, followed by Asha.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, Moises Cisneros with the Sierra Club. And just, absolutely want to thank the panel. The body of work is tremendous, and specifically the subcommittee on the desert. Thank you so much. Just a point of clarification, I guess. I didn't really quite understand, or maybe I heard wrong. The 2,600 conversion, or I thought it was 2,600 per city per year. Is that correct? Did I hear that correctly? And if so, that just the in the Mojave Desert alone, that's 25 cities. In the first year, you're looking at 6,500,000 acres converted in the desert. And if that's correct, that's a huge amount. So I'm not sure if those numbers are right. Would love some clarity on that. Thank you.
Marian, could you quickly, and I apologize for breaking in here, Virginia, but I think that's an easily addressed question. Marian, I think, isn't that the total number?
Yes, that's the total number. So apologies for not being more concise when I stated that. That's a reference to the 2022 CARB scoping plan for achieving carbon neutrality. So you can look at the details within there. that it's 2,600 acres per year total, not per municipality or city, if you will.
Okay. Thank you. Next we have Asha, followed by Lena.
Great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Asha Sharma. I'm the organizing co-director with Pesticide Action Network. I first just really wanted to thank the committee members for the deep intention and thought that went into these recommendations. It's really clear and very impressive given the short timeline too. So huge thank you, first of all. I also wanted to support the inclusion of reductions in fossil fuel derived pesticides, which has really critical public health benefits as well as climate benefits. I also really appreciate the intention behind increasing organic transition opportunity and access to all farmers. This is really key, and there's really huge barriers for especially small scale farmers, farmers of color. I still think it's critical to raise the ambition of the scoping plan target of 20% of agricultural acreage being organic by 2045 in order to truly see meaningful shifts away from our fossil fuel intensive ag systems to more sustainable alternatives. And lastly, I just want to deeply urge better inclusion of communities into this process, as mentioned under the cross-cutting recommendations. There are tremendous barriers for participating in these kinds of meetings for rural communities. So I really hope that more intention and effort can be put in the future to ensure that the folks most impacted by these recommendations can be better included in the process. Thank you again so much for your efforts. Really appreciate the opportunity to comment.
Should I go next?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Lena Brooke, and I'm the acting director of the Food and Agriculture team with the Natural Resources Defense Council. And like so many folks that have already spoken, I also want to extend my gratitude to this group for the deep thought and work that you've put into this process. It's been a very kind of race to the finish line, I know, and there's a lot to be excited about in what's being presented. I also want to appreciate the commitment to including organic agriculture as a climate smart ag solution in the committee's work. And I think, to Virginia's point about specificity, I really encourage you all to come back to the idea of setting really clear benchmarks for what you think the state ought to be achieving around expanding organic, both acreage and the number of farmers that are becoming organic certified. We have an organic transition program at the Department of Food and Agriculture now that is meant to serve socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers and BIPOC farmers and limited resource farmers, exactly to enable and support the kind of transition that we know we need to be making as a state. And so there's this synergy in place that I think we could be leveraging as we think about the exact kind of benchmark and goal that this committee wants to recommend. And like Asha said, I also believe that we could be more ambitious, and we should be more ambitious than the 20% by 2045 goal that's currently in the scoping plan. 2045 is a long ways from now, and we know that climate change is accelerating in its impact. And so if organic farming and converting to organic farming can help our ag sector be more of a climate solution, we ought to be really doubling down on that. And finally, just also want to echo that it is really important for you all to continue to commit to changing the way that pesticides are used in agriculture in California. As has been already said, it's a fossil fuel intensive product. It also creates a huge number of issues in terms of impacting the health of farm worker communities, farm workers themselves. And we know that there are better practices out there that we need to be relying on as a state. So there's a lot of intersection there between the organic goals and some deeper thinking around reducing the use of pesticides in our agricultural system. So I'll stop there. Really appreciate the opportunity to comment, and thank you all for the work that you're doing.
Thank you. MK Youngblood, you're next.
Thank you. I'm the tribal secretary for Haslett Basin Hokomomono and also the chief officer of emergency management for California Tribal Emergency Response Relief Agency. I had a couple of questions. I wanted to know how the establishment of the targets for this were, even though it's not explicitly stated, would possibly indirectly affect the tribal lands. And given that the tribal lands are frequently significant natural and working landscapes, could the setting of these targets for these lands potentially have a negative impact on tribal communities?
Virginia, I can take a brief crack at that, but we did not single out tribal lands per se. We did not direct the state in any way, shape, or form about which specific lands should be impacted or attention directed to it. And because if they are tribal lands and they have sovereignty, the state does not have that kind of authority. That's another issue to the side, but it's a great question and one to address. I think that the state has the resources to address more effectively than we do.
Lori, I just wanted to recognize also that during the last discussion that we had at our meeting at the close, that there was some recognition that that there was some language put in, I think, into the new revision that addresses the inclusion of Indigenous people and tribes in all of the processes that go forward around this.
Yes, that is flagged as one of the key areas of cross-cutting recommendation, is to increase the engagement of tribes and tribal communities. So we are urging the state to increase its intentionality there, recognizing that it has done so in the past several years, but to accelerate and enhance those efforts too. So MK, I hope that addresses your question.
Yes, thank you.
Virginia, are there any other questions in the waiting room?
I don't think so. And Jen is back too, so she'll take over from here.
Thank you for pinch hitting there. Mark?
Yeah, as we're, I guess, winding down the discussion on this report that we've done, I guess I would like to raise a comment to the state folks, Matt, Virginia, Jen, Adam online. My observation, as you know, I'm not an urban ecologist. I took on the mantle of trying to lead the urban developed lands section. But as you've noticed in the discussions we've had, I mean, the urban environment is not particularly the remit of the CDFA or resources or CARB, and it's not readily recognized, I guess, under natural and working lands. And so the NGOs that have showed up and offered, various organizations that have offered comment on the report have focused on, forests, agriculture, deserts, wetlands, and things like this. I'm concerned at the end and hope that you can bear in mind that 97% of Californians live in these developed lands, and that actions that can be taken are really important in these developed lands. And if you look at the nature-based solutions document, I mean, there are more numerically more suggestions from the developed lands than any other system that was offered. And I just hope that you guys are able to hit the right buttons with the right people with the state of California, so that recommendations that come here and in other sources for natural working lands on developed lands actually resonate and get done.
I think that's a really good point, and perhaps we can return to that at the end of this meeting to have a little bit of a conversation with the state. I know we're scheduled to have a break here very shortly about how the follow-up will be done, but I think one of the striking things before I turn to you, Matt, is that with the relatively, for this state, minimal level of projected population growth, the ability to keep development within the pre-existing development footprint and to expand the conservation of natural and working lands in a formal way is really feasible. And we'd like to have that conversation with the state about how it can step up and accelerate those actions. We've recommended pathways, we've recommended mechanisms, we've recommended ways to pay for this. But I don't believe there's been another time in the state's history where this degree, where we have such a ratcheting down of projected growth and the ability to enhance developed areas and their livability and reduce their, if you will, carbon footprint while expanding the climate resilience of the larger landscape, I don't think has ever been higher. So I'd love for us to have a time at the end of this meeting today to maybe talk about that, and that also ties to what Carrie has identified as an ongoing dialogue. Matt?
Yeah, thanks for underscoring that opportunity, Lori. I just wanted to echo what Mark was bringing up. We dealt with this a lot in some of our community air protection. We had lengthy multi-year design rituals in AB 617 communities, and we ran into this conundrum where we were being expected to reduce emissions, or in this case, in this committee, sequester carbon, but that the reductions of emissions, were basically, mild augmentations of the business as usual model. And so we weren't getting credit in those emission reduction budgets for the exposure reductions. I think there's got to be a way for us to, calculate the benefits of making people more resilient, more independent, and be less dependent on the state during climate crisis and during wildfires. And so the investments in the urban landscapes, the carbon numbers aren't huge. Until you get down to, losing bodies, losing neighborhoods, heat island effect. I mean, we can actually target where we invest based on the chirp and satellite data. There's a way for us to do a phase one emergency equity strategy to address 1936 sidewalks all over port towns in this state. And to do some of these urgent phase one things that render all these other benefits that I think we can get better at calculating. I think we can get better at doing the health impact studies and the community economic benefit studies and bring around a much more robust or a much more inclusive cost benefit analysis for all this work. That way we don't keep two sets of books and keep, hiding the public health impacts. So there's something to what you're talking about there, Mark, that is worth more than carbon.
And I would say that in every one of these conversations, we have flagged multiple co-benefits that accrue from the actions. Nathaniel, you're up, and then we really should move to our break. We're a little bit beyond our break time here, but over to you.
I just have a quick administrative question. So we got some feedback, but are these is everything we've said now like biblical canon, or like can we change things at this point? What's the procedure moving forward on amendments?
I don't know that we've ever had biblical canon. That is just such a wonderful concept, Nathaniel. You've empowered us to such a degree there. I believe we have effectively, we got an extension at our last meeting, where our last meeting we had our sections 2 and 3, our targets and pathways, which we submitted, and then the state made an extension to to this weekend for the final report. So Jen would have to answer this question, but I believe we've effectively, other than things like typos perhaps, but I don't know, I believe we have made our final report at this juncture. Jen, can you clarify?
Yeah, I'm trying to kind of think through this on the spot a little bit. Because we've gotten the report from the committee, but we have not posted it online yet because we have not been able to make it ADA accessible since getting it last night. So I think if there are minor typos or things like that, we could accept those changes. But I think now that you've conveyed, what the targets are to all of us and members of the public here, we should stick with what we've conveyed. But again, if there's minor typos or things like that, we want to get that right, because these reports are going to be an appendix to our final deliverable for the January 1 deadline. So I'm not sure what you're asking for, Nathaniel, if you're asking for rewrites or those sort of more minor adjustments, but that's what I think we can offer at this point.
That's clear. Thank you.
And Nathaniel may have been responding to Virginia's question, but I think partially, Nathaniel, Virginia hadn't had a chance to look at the more contextual piece there. She was seeing the targets alone, and that's the sense that I got. So I think your contextual work helped clarify what the target recommendation you were making was. Well, with that, let us take, at this point, a 10-minute break. So if we could come back at 2:30, we will reconvene at that time.
Jen or Kimberly, can I ask you a quick question? Are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Would it be possible to get a copy of this recording just for my own learning? Like before it goes public? How long does it usually take for these to go public? I can also wait for that.
Kim turns it around very quickly, and we will post it on our website, and I'll send out a link to the website to you.
Okay, is there any chance that'll happen this week?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. Thanks. Just thinking about another meeting.
Yep. Kim, correct me if I'm wrong.
See that it's a non-negligible chance. It's a highly probable chance, right, Jen?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. We have, perhaps somebody can turn off their mic. We're getting a lot of feedback. I think we have most of the committee back. We have a quorum back. So why don't we begin again? Jen, this is the next portion of this meeting is really looking ahead to our work in 2024 on the aspects more of the modeling elements of the scoping plan as it has been done here. So we thought that we would take a minute to just review the charge or the purposes of 1757. And as we all know, our first charge was really to work on these implementation targets and approaches. And that the next phase was really looking at the modeling and analysis, and to some degree, the methodologies. So we asked if Jen would be, and Adam would be willing to just give us a quick review of the elements of 1757, and then have Adam walk us through more of, just as a refresher on the modeling and inventory done to date. And then for us to hone in on how we want to approach things in 2024, we have currently not planned another meeting in calendar year 2023. So we need to set up our meeting schedule for 2024. We may not be able to do that today, but we can commit to getting that done within the next week or two so that we can start to get our calendars set for that. So with that, Jen, would you walk us through a quick reminder of the salient elements of 1757, and then we'll turn it over to Adam?
Yes, I will. And I can't see any of you. So yeah, just wanted to first of all say again, what Matt and Virginia and Adam said, thank you all for the great work and so much attention to detail and thoughtfulness in this process. I know it's been a full year, and I know also that you have all really started to, come together and work really well together in the last several months. So we're excited to really kind of continue with this momentum into the next year, but also maybe have a little bit more space to think and to interact too. So we put this slide up at the very first meeting of this committee way back in February of this year, just to sort of outline all the elements of AB 1757. We know it's a big bill that calls for a lot of things that we should do to increase our work and pace and scale in the natural and working land sector. So this on the screen here is really just a snapshot of the main tenets of AB 1757 and what we're being asked to do over the next several years. It's, as we've said before, a really exciting moment and a really exciting bill for this sector, but it is a lot to sort of digest and unpack. So as Lori mentioned, first and foremost, it really asks that we determine this ambitious range of targets for the natural and working land sector. to think about how we can integrate these targets eventually into the next scoping plan and other relevant state policies and planning documents. The bill does call for a lot of work and thinking around how to improve our GHG accounting and standardize that. And by 2025, January 1, 2025, the bill also asks that we update the Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy. And in doing so, that we really think about, barriers to implementation and implementation pathways of the targets that are being set. And there's a lot in this bill, but it also asks that we establish, obviously, this expert advisory committee and think about, how do we track and develop standard methods for tracking greenhouse gas and resilience benefits. So those are some of the big tenets of the bill. And just to focus in on the charge for the expert advisory committee in this bill, you've already done the big thing, is providing us recommendations and informing our development of this ambitious range of natural and working lands targets. So good work, and thank you very much. The next 3 bullets are really focusing on your work ahead. And it asks that the committee, or tasks the committee, to really think about how to better inform and review future modeling and analysis for this sector. And also how to advise all of us state agencies on implementation strategies, standardized accounting, and importantly also barriers to efficient implementation of these goals and targets we're setting. These last couple bullets are really going to be wrapped up into helping guide and direct what goes into the next California Natural and Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy, which, as I mentioned, is due in January 1, 2025. The committee is not asked to write that strategy, so you're off the hook there, but a lot of the elements of the committee's work will, of course, inform, what goes into that strategy and how we're thinking about that strategy. So we just wanted to put that up there as a reminder of the things the committee is being asked to do in 1757. And we'll have a lot of space, obviously, to think about the year ahead for the rest of this item. But because of this element around thinking about modeling and analysis, we wanted to have Adam sort of walk through the modeling that has already been done and planned improvements to the modeling to make sure, again, we're all on the same page as we think about sort of next steps for modeling and analysis in this sector. So I'm going to pause or hand it off to Adam, and then we'll have a lot of time to discuss and chart sort of the year ahead. I will say we as the state would like to come back with some reflections on where we think it would be most helpful for having the committee's guidance and input in 2024. And we'd love to do that, obviously, in an early meeting in 2024. So we're putting out sort of what 1757 is asking for, but we'd also like the space to tell you all sort of what would be most helpful for us as we take these next steps in implementing AB 1757. So know that a little bit more guidance is also coming from us too. Adam, I will stop sharing my screen and pass it over to you.
Yeah, well, we have some comments here. So Lori, go ahead.
Thanks. I think that, sorry for the reverberation there. I think that it would be of interest to the committee, and several folks have asked this, about how you plan to engage with the committee on an ongoing basis around the state targets, and how to keep that conversation open, as opposed to this being a, here we have delivered our report and it went into somewhere and it came out another way. So I think there would be some appreciation from the committee to hear a little bit more about that. I just wanted to flag that, and in particular where it's coming to the 2025 revisions of plans and how to incorporate there. So I just wanted to flag that as a point of specific discussion that I think a number of people have identified. And Carrie, I know you also had a point.
Thank you, Lori. I second that. that would be something we're definitely looking forward to in the future as we move forward. I also have a question about the timeline that was presented by Jen. I'm aware that the EPA climate pollution reduction grants are coming up and they're due in the spring, both the targets and then a month later, the implementation process. So would any of the work that we are going to be developing in the next few months or discussions we have go into that? And if not, or if so, how would we engage in that with you to meet that timeline? And then second, will any of the work that we did just now that we submitted to you go into that process? And if we need to put a pin in that question, that's fine.
No, it's a great question. I couldn't find my mute button. Matt Botel might have a little bit more to add here because his colleague at the Air Resources Board is really coordinating a lot of us around that EPA grant program. So if he doesn't jump in now, I think it's a great question you're raising, Carrie. We're definitely engaging a lot in that program and next steps there. So I'd love to kind of talk among the team and come back to you with a better response if Matt doesn't have anything immediate to add.
Nothing immediate to add, but I think it is a good.
Oh, you're freezing, Matt. Okay. You're officially frozen. Maybe we'll see if he unfreezes and come back to that question, Carrie.
Thank you.
And I also think you're Lori raising a great point that Carrie obviously is echoing about, like kind of continuous engagement on the targets and progress towards the targets. And it's something that we internally at the state have been talking a lot about, like, okay, it's great to set targets, but now how do we track these and measure these? And obviously that's a huge component of the bill. So we're doing some thinking now about that, but I think that could be, you know, an early item at a future committee meeting that we could talk through with you all of, like, what does this look like? We've set the targets now. Actually, how do we achieve them? How do we report on progress? So maybe that's something we can think about as a future agenda item of us sort of sharing our initial thinking and you all reacting on sort of what's the cadence and dynamic like for dialogue and discussion in achieving these targets. Lara?
Yeah, and as we think about, I guess, and discuss targets or implementation, there's also a lot of effort happening on the wildfire and forest/landscape resilience task force right now, also going through, you know, development of targets and implementation kind of goals. And so it might be nice also to figure out what the kind of formal connection between this process and that is. I'm sure you're in conversation there, but that effort has sort of expanded beyond forests at this point to kind of cover all of California in the same way that this one does. So I would, yeah, and then,
yep. Sorry, hope I didn't cut you off, but agreed. I think that would be great. And we've been having some good conversations with the task force staff, especially more frequently recently as we all get closer to our deadline. So I think that would be really great. And something we've heard from you all plus public comment on, you know, being more transparent and clear about these various, you know, efforts we have underway to set targets to increase ambition on management across landscapes. So yeah, we can come back with that too, Laura. Well, we'll have a lot more time, I think, to discuss too and to react and have a dialogue after maybe Adam shares some of his modeling thoughts, and maybe Matt Botel will also hop back on at some point too. But Adam, over to you.
All right. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit, about the modeling, sort of a refresher, but I went back to my first presentation that I gave this committee back in February, I guess, and that has a lot of detail. And so I didn't want to just like rehash all of the detail. So you can go back and you can see that presentation. So here I'm kind of going to expand on a lot of the technical work that we're going to talk about in the coming months, which is not just about future projection modeling, but also about carbon accounting and our natural working lands inventory. All right, so just to refresh everyone's memory, you know, here we're talking about how do we get to carbon neutrality? That's the ultimate goal. And natural working lands are now a part of this equation officially. And so we are both, can be a sink or a source. And so we're going to be driving down emissions on the fossil fuel side, what we call this AB 32 set of emissions, because that's from the initial legislation. That's where AB 32 came from. And then, you know, natural and working lands are going to do what natural and working lands are going to do. And then we're going to have to try to remove all the remaining emissions, if there are any, in some other way, potentially technological solutions. But we're talking about this middle section here, right? And oh shoot, I'm not advancing my slides. So okay, here's this equation that I just walked us through: AB 32 emissions, natural and working lands, and then mechanical carbon dioxide removal. All right, just to also refresh our memory, what are we talking about? And of course, you all already know this. We're talking about basically every square inch of California. So we're not talking about just aggregating projects like shown here on the left and just show like reductions or benefits from individual projects, but we want the full carbon balance shown on the right across every square inch. Ideally, in a perfect world, getting to all the emissions going in and out of the atmosphere and biosphere. But since we're going to get technical in the coming months, it's not really even just about the carbon that's really on the landscape. There are flows of carbon that we have to account for when you start getting into carbon accounting, right? So here is a diagram from our natural and working lands carbon inventory, which is the next big document that I'll send you on to read for your enjoyment. So now you have the appendix from the scoping plan. Now you'll also have the natural and working lands carbon inventory. So this is just an example of how we're separating what's natural and working lands versus something that's anthropogenic. So we have harvested wood products, for example, that come from the forest. Those stocks that are in the harvested wood products are part of natural and working lands. But then once they go to out of use to a disposal site, then we would count them in these AB 32 emissions. And there's also some more details involved there. But this is just an example of the things we need to start thinking about with carbon accounting. Additionally, if we're thinking about agriculture, as we said before, we don't count livestock, right? That's an anthropogenic, just within this anthropogenic boundary. Same thing with like fertilizer production, and then a few of those emissions associated with that. However, I should say, as natural and working lands have become an official part of the scoping plan and the state's climate strategy, you know, a lot of new connections have been discovered between these two boundaries, and we're having to figure out where exactly something is in natural and working lands versus anthropogenic. Okay, and so we've been talking about modeling a lot, and that's great. You have to have models to set targets, right? Because what do models do? They ensure that our targets are science-based and that whatever target we set hopefully is utilizing the best science and data, and then also hopefully is somehow responsive to climate change and different management scenarios we might employ and other major drivers of change to carbon into the future. So that's great. You set a target with your modeling, but then you also have to track progress towards those targets. That's how we say we're on track, or we're ahead of schedule, or we're behind schedule, right? And so that's where the inventory comes in. And so we have to also keep an inventory that is sensitive to climate change and management and other drivers of change. So the overall objective of doing this work is to understand the past, present, and future of all natural and working lands carbon dynamics within the state of California to inform climate policy and programs. All right, so you may have seen these diagrams before. This is from our Natural and Working Lands Carbon Inventory. So the pie chart on the left is showing where all of our carbon stocks are in the state, where we estimate all the carbon stocks are in the state, broken out by land type. And then on the right, you can see how those carbon stocks, how we estimate they have been changing through time. And this is something that we are continuously trying to improve and update into the future. But behind those graphs, there's a bunch of maps, right? And so we try to figure out where the carbon is and how it's changing and why it's changing, which gets into the additional work that we do. So we don't just map the carbon and just call it good. We try to understand why things are changing, right? Because we're trying to inform policy. So here, we keep a wildfire emissions inventory, and this is showing the CO2 emissions for the years up to 2022, the most recent year that we've done this analysis for. And then also we have to quantify, for example, the carbon impacted by forest management. And so we do this work as well, understanding the type of management action that happens and how much carbon those actions are impacting on across the state per year. And so eventually we try to get to these sorts of general diagrams here. This is from a report we did a few years ago showing, flows into pools, and then the fluxes out from wildfire, prescribed fire, or something else, and then carbon that gets transformed by forest management, and then something happens to it, and then it also gets emitted into the atmosphere at some rate. And so here we have estimates for some of these numbers. So the lines that are in are solid. We estimate, we have estimates for, but then the dashed lines are areas where we need to improve our flow estimates and need more information and better models and things like that to get the actual change in carbon through time. And so our inventory is currently carbon stock based. We measure how carbon stocks are changing through time. Carbon stocks are not greenhouse gas emissions. Getting to greenhouse gas emissions, an inventory of greenhouse gas emissions, is orders of magnitude more complex than a carbon stock inventory. And most of the science and data and models for statewide sorts of analyses are really focused on stock change. If you want to get to something like emissions, this is just for the forest sector, it starts to look something like this. And this is something we're already working on, trying to understand better, but you can just see carbon comes in to a pool, a carbon pool, and then it just leaves. This is the biological system, the biosphere, and then it leaves through various fluxes, through management, and then once a tree is cut, lots of things can happen to it, and then we have to try to track that through time to eventually get to full-on emissions. And that's the ultimate goal, to get to something like this for all sectors in natural and working lands. We got a long ways to go, but that's where we're hoping to get to eventually. And so with the inventory, that's how we track progress. So here, just really quick review of modeling, because again, I spoke about this back in February, and there's a lot more detail there. And then of course, you've all been looking at that appendix, more detail than you'd ever want in there. But we use the modeling to set carbon targets, to quantify the impact of climate change and other major drivers of change, and to simulate how we can change the outcomes of carbon into the future. And we want to create a repeatable process that we can improve upon through time. And we want to ensure that our targets are science-based, and that we can actually track progress to those targets. So setting carbon targets and doing the carbon modeling and the inventory is a little bit different than what we've been working on to date. So the implementation targets, we can set targets for actions that maybe science isn't even quite there yet for being able to quantify those carbon impacts. But so when we're doing modeling, we're limited to what we can actually model and quantify. Again, we use a range of models to simulate lands into the future. We are not stuck with all of these models. In fact, some we definitely want to improve upon and are in the process of doing so. So those are conversations that we can have this coming year. But I also wanted to emphasize that the modeling, but also not just the modeling, but the inventory too. It's not just about, but actually, especially the modeling. It's not just about carbon, right? So and this is another thing, we can have these discussions moving forward too. Yeah, there's the carbon modeling. That's great. But then we also have to quantify what are the impacts on air quality from our actions? What are the impacts on public health and economics? And actually, that's legislatively mandated. We have to quantify those impacts somehow. So in this last scoping plan, we did this for wildfires. So how would our actions affect carbon? Yes, but then how would it affect wildfire fire regimes, and what that would do to air quality impacts and public health impacts? And then how that would affect the economy. And then for all sectors, actually, we did an economic analysis about, how much everything would cost, how would this affect jobs, incomes, things like that. That's also in the scoping plan for natural and working lands. And then as we move into the future, we try to quantify as many co-benefits as we possibly can. And this is for the modeling, but also for the inventory. We're going to be trying to monitor all sorts of things, and not just carbon. And I just throw this up. You don't need to read it, but we're working on criteria for what sort of models we can incorporate, or what do we need for an inventory, or if there is a carbon pool that needs to be incorporated into our climate planning, great. But then we need this criteria to be met so that we have enough information that we can set a scientifically based target and then also track progress towards that. And that is actually the end of my presentation. So thanks.
Adam, I have to say that sometimes I look at you and I go, now, if somebody is going to have the ability to answer all the questions, it's going to be Adam. Because when you lay it out like that, it's very, very comprehensive. We appreciate that. And we know that you will be tolerant of our coming in and honing in on individual specific things rather than being quite so universal as you are in that. Thank you for that reminder. If Joan Taylor could take herself off of visual, that would be appreciated. Thank you with that. So this is our opportunity to talk further about how we want to approach our work in this. And I know, Matt, you have your hand up. We're gonna definitely go there, but I do want to flag for everybody else as well that I think it's key for us to talk about how we want to approach this, where we want to target in with Adam, what kinds of specific areas we think we may want to explore with him. And as I said earlier, some members of the committee have deep capacity in specific areas here. Others may be more general. So where do we want to have experts to come in and help us address some of these very specific areas? As I say, I know for Forest, there are a number where I would want to have people come in. I suspect Will has some folks he's going to want to target that'll look both at what models are used and what assumptions are used and what data sets are used. Because in the most elegant of construction, those three things are going to, lead to vastly different kinds of outcomes. So just want to flag that, and we will go over to Matt.
Thanks, Adam. Learn something new every time. My question was actually because I get the sense that this committee is going to get to, play with the model and run some scenarios and be a little creative with the model based on the new research that we have. Like on the EJAC, I wasn't pulling together carbon stocks, obviously, so couldn't really interact with the model, I guess is my point. So what I'm wondering though is, to be practical about this, like I think meeting with the relevant agencies is vital, right? Like asking these scientists to pull a solution out of their hat, based on their personal academic research or what they infer from the state government is one thing. It'd be really cool if we all knew an intractable problem that the agencies are trying to deal with, or a practical preferred solution that they'd like to understand better. I'd like to work with people doing the projects and the strategies that the professionals have been trying to get done for a long time. Like, I think there's a way to focus the recommendations of this committee to specific, narrow, to at least look at the preferred solutions that state agencies want to apply. Because I think, I don't know, this obviously, this ritual right here receive negligible funding, right, to do all of this. And so then to use this committee to go out and sort of, inflict, maybe optimistic science on an agency that has, is dealing with the same workforce development problems, is dealing with the same sort of resource allocations. I think we'd all benefit from meeting with CAL FIRE, meeting with the folks in each of the geographies that the model represents. Save us a ton of time. My 2 cents.
Yeah, great. All right, so a few things. Okay, being able to get your hands on the model and play with the model. So these models are not like online tools or just spreadsheets or something, right? So these are, you gotta do months and months of work to be able to do one run. So it's not like something, technically you can play around with them now. They're all like publicly available. So you can get the code, but it's like, you can't just play around with them, I guess is the point.
Yeah, well, we have folks that have the technical capacity, but I think doing something deliberate in this setting and with some of the funding that Carrie brought up earlier sounds like a really good solution, where we're hiring your modelers, your company, and we're paying them to throw a few different ingredients in.
So can I just
do it?
Matt, I think I'm hearing something here, and I want to suggest a different path forward here. What the funding that Carrie was talking about, we don't have any. But what I'm hearing you say is you'd like to be able to say to Adam, hey, why don't you run the model on these kinds of parameters? And you can see there's not just a single model there. And he's also flagging for us that this can take, many weeks to do a run. So, and we don't have the capacity to direct CARB's personnel on this, but what we recommended earlier, based on our expert knowledge, I think we want to be able to work with Adam to say, here's how we were coming to those numbers. We'd like to see if you can do A, B, C, and D in your modeling to see how you can validate, ramify, et cetera, what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to put some parameters about our ability to turn to Adam and say, hey, Adam, can you turn your division over to us for us to give the stuff there? Just want to flag that.
Yeah, I mean,
and then-
there are third parties that can do this modeling, and we could maybe make recommendations off of running those models so that there's some sort of confidence threshold, Adam, so that we're not asking you to do something that doesn't have legs. That's, I mean, there's, we've built, a lot of us have built models like this.
Yeah.
Sure, great.
And we have Debbie and Mark. Adam, if you wanted to reply further, please do, but Debbie and Mark are in line.
I was just going to say, yeah, if you want to speak with other agencies, happy to invite them. And then, I don't think we were asking you necessarily to do any modeling yourselves, but yeah, of course, whatever you like. All right. Yes, Debbie.
Thanks. Yeah, I have two questions. One is, I'm not one of the people who have strong modeling skills in this group. And so I'm just trying to figure out, how can I be of most use in this process? And kind of, I guess I'm thinking, would I be providing information for you to consider as you develop your model? Or, what is kind of the best use of people on the committee who do not have that modeling background? So that's one question. And then the second question is, will you, as you're doing this work, will you be working kind of with each group, or will we be kind of working independently as we did during the first year? It just seems like, you showed that image on the screen and you were like, it would be great to have this kind of model for each of the groups. And I'm thinking like, well, that seems kind of like more of a collaboration with you in the group. So I'm just wondering how you envision kind of us working in the next year.
Great. Yeah. Okay. So how can people who don't have a lot of modeling background help? Okay. So most people, right, don't actually have a lot of modeling background, but part of my job is going out and extracting this needed information from these people that have like real world information and somehow turning that into models. So part of that is understanding what like major drivers of change are within systems, or maybe there are regional dynamics that I just am unaware of, or something along those lines, or just sort of like sniff testing that assumptions make sense, things like that. And then how will we interact? Well, I think that's more up to you than us, actually. I think because now we're past this, this target setting place. Yeah, we can interact more, I would think, especially on this this technical piece. And that's fine with me. But yeah, I mean, yeah, how the committee wants to interact is really up to you all.
And Debbie, just to note here that I think we should be able to be in a more collaborative stance with Adam and Jen as we are moving forward here in terms of interactive as opposed to otherwise. So Mark and then Chelsea.
Yeah, thanks. So I had two comments. One, I mean, Jen, you mentioned that early on in the 2024, you'd like to get with us and talk a bit about your needs of what you're looking for from us as a committee. But I guess I'd like you to urge to also think about when you want that from us, because I'm thinking about, when do we advise you on what? And I'm just thinking based on Adam's comments about how long it takes to set up and run, were we to do something like a sniff test or think about assumptions and try and give Adam feedback on the modeling, November would be a terrible time to do that. And so when would you want to be doing that? But whereas you also are looking for thinking about barriers and opportunities for implementation, and maybe that fits more in the latter half of a year than the first half of the year, but kind of giving some specifics so that we can actually have the time to feedback in an appropriate way would be really great. The second comment, and this is more for Adam, is that you were talking about inventories and going to admissions and how much more difficult that is. And the example you were using is force, and that's a reasonable and one to look at. It would be nice, if not now, during that time when you're telling us a bit about what and when, to be talking about some of these other systems. I'm thinking about developed lands and thinking about, are we going to model how much avoided emissions there may be through opportunities like green roofs and urban farming and other things like that? Or is that kind of beyond the scope of the modeling that we're going to be doing? But those kinds of questions probably come up in deserts and wetlands and all the systems. And, you have a limited amount of capacity. And while you're saying that you'd like to get modeling done wall to wall in all the systems, it just doesn't seem like you're going to be able to apply that sort of evenly everywhere. And you have to be high grading and thinking what are the most important things to do first. And so kind of getting some sense of that from you would be very, very helpful, I think. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, I guess I'll answer your second question first, and then if Jen wants to pop in on the timeline. Yes, right. So first, I guess I'll work backwards through your question. So yeah, we have to prioritize where we put our resources, because you're right, there's endless modeling that could be done and there's limited time and resources. So just like with the scoping plan update, 2022 one, we prioritized by current carbon stocks and where the most carbon dynamics would happen, right? So we put the vast majority of our effort into the forest, shrubland, and grassland modeling piece. And then it just kind of went down from there in terms of complexity of the modeling. But a model doesn't necessarily have to be complex to be good and accurate. So maybe there are clever ways to get to some of these land use or these land classifications that maybe don't require as many dynamics as a forest system would, with wildfire and hydrology and topography and all of these things. Yeah, I guess there's that's that. Okay, so Jen, to you.
Yeah, Mark, it's a great question. I think, we're all just so steeped in what we're trying to deliver in the next couple weeks, but that's what I was sort of alluding to is after we get through that, I would love to, and we need to talk as a team, but I would love to be able to come back to you all with, okay, here are the final targets based on this. Here's how we're seeing, the year unfold as far as what tracking and monitoring might look like, what the climate smart strategy update would look like to really support the implementation of these targets. So I think it's on us to sort of map out what we see as a couple next steps and workshop that through Lori and the co-chairs and propose sort of a path forward. But I would invite anyone else to react to that from the state side too. And I know that we're not going to be able to figure it all out in the next 15 minutes. So there's going to also need to be some work done between the state and the chair, after this meeting to respond to some of the comments that you're sharing here.
And let's make time for Chelsea, and then I know we want to go to public comment, and I make one thought after Chelsea speaks.
Yeah, thanks so much. I guess I just wanted to echo what Mark and Davey were saying, and so I don't know if I have actually I think articulated it really well. I think it'd be really helpful. I've been a little bit not as fully present today as I would want because my kiddo's sitting right across from me sick. But so sorry if I missed something, but just to have a little bit more clarity on what success looks like for this next phase, like and thinking about like specifically what the tasks are. So it's like, are you going, like you will help review, the EAC will help review the choice of the models being used or the structure of the models, or is it that we will help identify data sets for parameterization, or what is it, that will be helping with specifically? I think that would at least help me wrap my brain around what success looks like.
Well, and one thought here. Oh, Mark, let's go for your comment first, and then I'll go after that. Mark? Sorry, Will. You're on mute. William, you're on mute.
Yeah, kind of in the same vein as Chelsea and Mark were saying. I just wonder if these model outputs need to be tempered by expert opinion in the end. So, for example, in ag, the only long-term data set we have on no-till, which all models will say will sequester carbon, but here in California, it lost carbon. So I think there's, the models are great, but they can only be viewed as potential, and then expert opinion would have to temper those targets in the end. That's it.
Yeah. One suggestion that I think we might look at based on what Mark was just also identifying is there may be places where we want to recommend changes in data sets used, or where expert opinion about those data sets is going to be essential. And the sacred cow that we all have in the forest arena is the forest inventory analysis. It's the best data set because it's the only data set. That also means it's also the worst data set because it's the only data set. Are there ways that expert speakers could suggest that we want to work with that? So there's data sets, there's assumptions. What are the most critical driving assumptions that Adam has in the model? Again, I'll use forests as the sacred cow, but the assumptions about what is the CO2 release from fire and at what intensity, and what is the CO2 release from salvage and at what intensity. So what are some of these key assumptions that drive big ranges in either sequestration or emissions? So that's data sets and key assumptions, and both of those our work might be really well informed by having additional expertise come in that all of you may know. So getting those speakers early, getting them lined up early, and what it is they can speak to in terms of real world, just like that example you just gave, Will, of, hey, everybody loves no-till, but here in California, let's look on the ground what's happened. It's actually an emission area. It's a source area. So to take those things early and to get in the request for expert input early, so that we can, in the latter part of the year, be having a more coherent conversation, because we've all kind of been brought up to speed or up to a level place. So that's one thought that I was wanted to suggest that we consider in terms of, like, first quarter, we really focus in on data and assumption and experts. Getting a thumbs up from Carrie. Thank you, Carrie. Anybody else have any thoughts with regard to that? Just structuring, because I know we need to turn to public comment here shortly. Does that seem acceptable to be? Oh, Carrie, go ahead.
That seems acceptable. One comment, is there interest among the committee or among state colleagues for speakers or people who can speak on the federal level for policies from the Inflation Reduction Act and programs that are rolling out from that would be complementary and inform this effort, this modeling effort?
Okay. let me take that as a question, as a recommendation.
Okay, thank
Yep.
you.
That's one kind. And please don't hesitate, Carrie, to resend me some of the speakers that you had sent earlier. I have it somewhere in my email, but getting these things more currently would be helpful. Then we have Matt and Chelsea, and then we'll go to Jen and Adam, and then to public.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I love the idea of figuring out who's not in the room. And so in that spirit, we had a motion at last Thursday's Environmental Justice Advisory Committee meeting, requesting a joint meeting with this advisory committee at some point in the new year. I think that group of people would be able to help us identify a whole lot of folks that can answer some of the vaguer parts of our recommendations around the social science hopes and the co-benefit hopes, but also certainly technical experts as well. So we're going to schedule that at some point. If I think maybe we have to have do we vote on this thing, Jim? Can we go to a meeting with the EJAC? Do we have to have a roll call for that?
I think we would have to have you formally requesting that, Matt.
Yeah.
We do. Oh, me as a member?
Mm-hmm.
I would so move and love for you guys to meet all these smart folks that know a ton of stuff that'll help you out.
So to be clear, Matt Holmes is asking for a joint meeting between the 1757 Advisory Committee and the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, and it would be a formal meeting, so it would be a Bagley Keene noticed meeting, so with all the trappings that would happen between the two bodies, just to be clear. And yeah, Matt, go ahead.
And maybe some preliminary meetings between the co-chairs or co-leads to help shape that agenda. Sub-quorum.
So I'd like to take that up a little separately here, just because we're at 8 minutes to wrapping here, and we do want to have some public comment. I totally hear the recommendation and the request and the process that's going to be entailed. So if we could take some of this offline and then come back to the committee, I think that would be great.
For sure.
Okay. And Chelsea?
Yeah, Lori, I was just wondering if you could clarify what you were proposing for this first quarter of the year, and then I'd love to hear from Adam if that I just get confirmation that that's helpful in what they're looking for.
So my suggestion was that within the first quarter, we're going through the key data sets that Adam has used and making recommendations, if there are any, for changes to those data sets, modifications to those data sets, approaches to those data sets, experts on those data sets. The same with regard to assumptions that he has used in the models. What are the key really driving assumptions? Because you can have all kinds of assumptions. Some are relatively minor, some are going to create big swings. So to go through those and see if we have any recommendations about that. And we have speakers who can help us look at those kinds of assumptions. So that is the three things of data sets, assumptions, and experts that we want to come in with to be able to look at some of the key issues that within our purview, we can recommend some changes to him, or just say, yeah, that's the best thing since the bee's knees, go for it. I've never seen a bee's knees up close, but it's a phrase, what can I say?
Yeah, so I guess I don't want to say how much time or the timing of when to discuss about modeling and inventory, because there's all the other things that Jen said you all have to talk about as well. So I think on the state side, we'll talk about maybe how much time to devote to all these various topics that you have to provide input on. So.
Right. Jen, did you want to say anything before we go to public comment? Because we're right up at the end here. And I think we're going to either need to extend for a few minutes for next steps, or we'll just follow up via email.
No, I mean, I think there's a few outstanding things here, Lori, but we'll have to talk to you as the chair and take all of this input. But we've heard it all and we've been recording it all. So thank you for the feedback here. Are
there any questions or comments in the public arena, Jen, that you can see? I don't see anything, but I can't see it.
I don't see anyone, any hands up, but yeah, members of the public, we will open up public comment now on this item about next steps, planning ahead for 2024. You know, that encompasses Adam's presentation around modeling and modeling improvements. So if anyone has public comment to offer, please raise your hand and we'll go in the order of the hands raised. I think if not, Lori, we can continue to see if hands come in, but if not, you all can continue to discuss, you know, next steps. And also we will come back to you with, you know, what we need once we get the targets out too.
I think one of the most essential next steps is logistics, which is our meeting calendar. And I know this is an extremely exciting thing to talk about and, you know, really moves the needle here, but it is essential. So in this year, we had, I think, 8 meetings. In terms of next year, we don't have quite as much pressure and we're a little bit more organized, but everybody has summer issues, you know, in terms of kids and holidays and school years and all of that. So I think the question that I'd like to just get a quick feedback from the committee on is fundamentally, what kind of time will people have available? You know, I would think we might want to try and meet 8 times next year or between 7 and 8 times. And so what are people's feelings about this in terms of we are very much wanting to be more in person and potentially in something on site outside of Sacramento. I don't know that that'll work for everybody. Thoughts on periodicity, or would you like us to work up a proposal for the committee to send out to you by email and respond to?
I'll just say that my April, like all of April and the first half of May are pretty much impossible for me because I'm in the field like basically every day. So other than that, I should have a lot more flexibility.
Okay. Other folks about their availability and interest in, you know, I'm sure you're all very interested in doing many meetings, but just your availability is going to be an issue too. So Mark? You're on mute, sir.
Yeah, sorry, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think I prefer loading it into the sort of school academic calendar months, January, February, March, September, October, November, with light working in the summer. But I think it's really important to hear from Jen ultimately on if you guys are going to be, when they're going to be done processing everything now and are ready to give us that guidance at the start of 2024, because I think that's really crucial to get us started. Thanks.
Laura?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I generally agree that it would be nice to have a sense of, to the extent possible, a sense of sort of when certain things are needed, or when certain input is going to be valuable, and to try and organize our meetings, you know, to the extent possible around that. And I know that's hard to do right now, given the other impending pressure that the state has. So hopefully that can help provide some guidance. I personally may be having to join remotely from an international location in the fall, but otherwise can try and make things happen.
Okay. Will, were you going to say something there? I saw you took yourself off mute for a little bit. You're back on, but.
Oh, I was going to say my availability, but I think it's not worth saying that here right now.
Okay. Well, why don't we do the following? I'll work with Jen and Adam on schedules and what they feel they need when. And then we'll get back to you. I know we all have other commitments and the places that we have to be. So that's going to have to get worked around so that we always have quorum. But if that is acceptable to the committee, we'll get back to you in the next couple of weeks around a proposal. So possibly not before Thanksgiving, given that Thanksgiving is early next week. I mean, it's early this year, occurring next week. And then get your feedback. But I think we can all give ourselves a big pat on the back and say no more meetings the rest of November or December. So I just want to echo the appreciation that we've heard from other people for all of you and the time that you've taken, because every single one of you has more than 100% job. So just want to say thank you for hauling in here and helping make this happen, because I personally think that the work that we've put into this really does set a new level for the state to consider about what we can and really, frankly, must do in this sector. So thank you all. And
thank you for leading us, Lori. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I love the heart. Great. Oh, I'll take that in. Okay. Jen, with that, may we draw this meeting to a close and thank the members of the public who have taken the time to be with us.
You may.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Jen.
Thanks.
Thanks.